Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our series of Vatavaran Talks, our monthly conversations on environment. We're very excited and very happy to have very eminent guests and experts to talk about an important and yet not very often discussed issue of impact of natural disasters on wildlife. Um, CMS Vatavaran, as you all know, is an initiative that is known for creating spaces and forums on important environment and wildlife issues, and also curates Asia's largest environment film festival and forum. Those you all know, IUCN CEC, it's a commission of the on education and communication for IUCN, which means that it's an expert network of people who are working in the conservation space, especially on education and communication. Um, and today our webinar is based on motion number 040 on mitigating the impact of disasters caused by natural hazards on wildlife by implementing specific measures, prevention, rescue, and restoration to be voted on IUCN Congress in Abu Dhabi in October this year. We felt it was an appropriate time to have a discussion on this because we don't really talk about this issue much. We all know that currently wildlife is not integrated in many of the disaster management and climate change adaptation plans. And in our webinar today, we will discuss the essential role played by non-captive wildlife in balance and resilience of ecosystems and human communities. We'll talk about how healthy ecosystems contribute to reducing the risk of disaster and to mitigating their impact. The various efforts and scientific work carried out on nature restoration issues through rewilding and conservation translocation. It is not only important for the health of the ecosystem, but also human health. We know now about the side effects of disasters caused by natural hazards on wildlife, such as increased mortality due to wildlife displacement to human areas, epizootics, and introduction of invasive alien species. We're glad to have global experts working on wildlife conservation from IUCN member organizations across the world for this webinar. Let me start by introduction. My name is Vasanti, and I will be moderating this webinar. I am the Director General of Center for Media Studies, Vatavaran, and also the Vice Chair of IUCN Commission on Education and Communication for South and Southeast Asia. We're very glad to have Ms. MIRIAM MONTERROSO, the DG of ARCAS, a very well-known wildlife rescue and conservation association from Guatemala. She's an attorney at law and has extensive 3 decades of experience in running various conservation and wildlife rescue and biodiversity conservation programs. Also like to welcome Dr. Dr. Laurie Marker, who is the founder and executive director of Cheetah Conservation Fund based in Namibia. She is well-known cheetah expert who has been doing research on cheetah genetics, ecology, and human-wildlife conflict mitigation. Welcome, Dr. Marker.
Thank
Glad to
you.
also have Dr. Anish Andheria, who is the president of Wildlife Conservation Trust based in Mumbai and who has worked extensively in protected areas in India to safeguard wildlife and ecosystems. He's a large carnivore specialist and has been advising not only various governments, but has managed many programs, authored books, and been on boards of many other conservation organizations. He's also a very inspirational speaker and he speaks about various environmental issues, not only India, but across the world. Let me start by welcoming these conservation champions and appreciate the amazing work that they do in contributing to our planetary health. Thank you all and welcome to this webinar on this important topic. Let me start, Dr. Anish Andheria, because we want to know from your work, and I'll come to Dr. Marker and Ms. Miriam also, about what patterns have you observed in your in how natural disasters like droughts or floods, which are very common in a country like India, particularly on wildlife, which are in protected areas and buffer zones. And what have you noticed about what are the trends that are we noticing now? Dr. Anish.
Um, First of all, thank you, Vasanti, for having me here, and I'm very happy to share the panel with very, very distinguished speakers.
Hmm?
See, natural disasters have shaped uh, speciation. It has shaped biodiversity. So it's nothing new. In the past, big volcanoes, tsunamis, forest fires, they have chiseled the kind of characters in species so that they could adapt to the changing environment. So environment changes, and with it, species changes, and once in a while, you have these natural disasters which happen.
Hmm.
However, um, because of the kind of impact that humans have had on the planet,
Yes.
a lot of these landscapes now, and when I say landscapes, I'm also so landscapes and seascapes, we have had irreversible impacts, and the most common are fragmentation and degradation, which
Hmm.
means the habitats which were very extensive or which had very little disturbance prior to, say, maybe 200, 225 years, have increasingly been dominated by people. As a result, what has happened is that the actual range of species and the distribution of certain species has gone down. And that has to be kept in mind when we talk of natural disasters, uh, because this planet is now dominated by one species, and that is Homo sapiens. So, in the past, when a natural disaster happened, if it was not an island,
Hmm.
a lot of damage would happen, but there would be immigration into that habitat over time. There will be certain propagule seeds, birds bringing in seeds, other animals, and they would move in and recolonize them. Although the composition would be different, and over time it will homogenize.
Yeah.
However, now because the landscapes are extremely small, especially I'm talking from the Indian context. On an average, see, India has more than 1,100 national parks and sanctuaries, conservation and community reserves, four types of protected areas. However, the average size of these is extremely small. It is less than 200 square kilometers, an average size of a national park and sanctuary. Most of the conservation and community reserves are even
Okay.
smaller. And so when you have such small, well protected or good habitats, any natural
Mhm.
disaster like drought, animals would, and drought is not a sudden
Okay.
thing. Drought happens over time and
Yeah.
animals have time to move. But because these are very hard boundaries, the species do well inside them, but the moment they move out, they are in direct contact with humans, and as a result, they are either
Mhm.
they get into conflict, or they fall prey, or there is no habitat outside of that particular area which was conserved for those species. Flooding is different. Flooding happens
Yeah.
like rapidly, and that sometimes doesn't give animals any chance to move. A lot of these
Mhm.
species drown, especially animals found in rivers. All the riverine species are deeply impacted. In the past, flooding is natural. In fact, flooding is healthy for ecosystems because it deposits a lot of silt in the wider habitat, which also helps the productivity of those habitats. But now, with climate change, the frequency and the intensity of
Mhm.
flooding has gone up. As a result, the negative impact of one flooding is directly intermingling with the
Mhm.
next flooding event, and it doesn't allow
Okay.
species to recover. And so drought moves people animal out, and then there is an impact. Flooding damages lots, but as I said, it's productive also, but not if it
Right.
happens every other year. So floods also have an impact, especially when your
Right.
corridors are weakening between protected areas, and especially
Right.
when protected areas are getting smaller. Wildfires, we all know. I'm not going to speak much about it because the wildfire, I think it's better spoken by my
Mhm.
friend Miriam, who is going to speak from the South American area. But yeah, in India, there is no wildfire as such. Most of them are man-made fires. But in the past, these fires would only burn the undergrowth. But because of the reduction in moisture levels, because of increasing temperatures, the fires are now engulfing canopy. As a result, the impact of wildfire is massive. Wildfire, anyways, is damaging if it happens every year, if it's recurring. The frequencies have gone up. Australia, Brazil, a lot of big areas have burned for months on end. As a result, the topsoil gets impacted, the the biodiversity in the soil gets impacted. As you know, that is the most important part of the ecosystem. Although we keep talking about tigers, elephants, lions, cheetahs, but the life actually of a evergreen forest is in the soil, the first 6, 7, 8 inches of soil. And when fire impacts that area, the next cycle of cyclone will lift all the soil, dust, tons and tons of dust goes up from many of these damaged areas, which were one very, very good quality forest, and they go and get deposited miles away, could be hundreds, 200,000 miles away, having negative impact on those areas as well. I'm not going to talk much about tsunamis. We all know that they are very, very devastating, but cyclones are, again, people call it cyclones, tornado. They're known by many different names, but the frequency and the intensity has gone up, especially in the coastal areas, and it has had devastating impact on not only the coastal areas, but also all the mangrove swamps, and to a certain extent, even the coral reefs. They get impacted because of extremely rough weather, which is very, very frequent. So natural disasters have happened even before human beings evolved on this planet. It actually shaped the biodiversity, but now, because of human beings, the impact of natural disaster is manifold. And with climate change being the cause of it, it could be a death knell for many, many species. It's a real tough phase that our planet is going through, and a lot more attention should be given to those.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anish. You gave an overview, and thank you for bringing the issue of forest fires. I think we definitely don't pay attention to how wildlife is being affected in these forest fires, and giving an overview on how important the whole ecosystem is when it is destroyed through the lens of a disaster. But I really wanted to actually also bring in Dr. Marker here, because she works especially on cheetah habitats. So, and to talk a little bit about how these disasters like droughts and forest fires or flooding that Dr. Anish talked about has been impacting, for example, the cheetah habitats and the prey, and how is that also impacting the human wildlife conflict that we often now talk about quite a bit. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Dr. Marker?
Well, yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the background. And I do believe, if we put it into context, we have a huge human population growth. I'm based out of Africa, where the cheetahs are found in some of the most arid landscapes in the world.
Yeah.
So the cheetah is kind of the icon of these arid landscapes. But when you look at that, how it is affected with the droughts, when you already have a very arid landscape, the droughts are exacerbated. And what happens is the grasslands dry up because there's no water for them, but also they're overgrazed by a lot of the livestock that is on the land, that is also needing that grasslands also to provide food for the people who are on the land. So it is a pretty extreme problem that we're facing in these arid areas where a top predator like the cheetah is found. And from that, as we look at this, we see the habitat degradation, which is just incredible. And when you get that overgrazing, you end up with a lot of different problems, but a lot of that also goes into erosion. And then when the effects of heavy rains come, because we do see this swing in these arid landscapes, where we end up with when the rains come, they are now like the Indian monsoons that we've learned so much about. But these monsoons, we don't think that much about in Africa. And these arid lands, when we do have rains that do come, they just take everything away, all the topsoil, everything. So those are some extreme problems. But also, as we end up with these droughts, we end up with a lot of problems with the movement and the migration of the different wildlife species, as well as intertwined with the livestock. And so you've got a lot of movement, and the movement is new areas where the animals aren't used to going to. They're trying to find their own water aspects, and all of those are really important. And then also the competition for the grasslands as well as for the livestock and the wildlife. And then a predator comes in, and if there is not enough wildlife, because oftentimes with these heavy droughts, a lot of the wildlife actually dies off in large numbers, as does the livestock. But if predators are within the mix and they catch livestock, then the predators become part of the human-wildlife conflict cycle. And those are the really big problems that we are faced with in these arid landscapes. And so we have to kind of look at what these migrations do look like. We're in a whole new world as we look at the climate change problems facing us. And the people are learning as well. But I think part of this really looks at community management. And those are many of the aspects that we're pretty deeply involved in trying to help the communities manage their livestock, their grazing land, as well as the wildlife, so that we can also put obviously a predator within the system. Predators do play a very key role as they clean up the mess that we've all made. They are nature's doctors. They are keeping the wildlife populations healthy by weeding out the sick and the old and the weak, which obviously become sicker and weaker as these climate problems are around us. So I think those are our biggest problems as we looked at shifting ranges, and it's new for everybody: the people, the livestock, the wildlife, and the predators. And that is causing even greater conflict as we look at it all together. But climate change is not just about droughts, it's also about these extreme weather changes that cause great problems. So thank you.
Thank you for giving us that perspective. It's very important. We'll talk a little bit more about community and the role of them also in this whole ecosystem management. But I do want to bring in Miss Miriam, because they have been doing a lot of rescue and rehabilitation work, and especially for endangered species. Ma'am, can you talk to us about how hurricanes and floods have had impacted on your efforts for rescue and rehabilitation of endangered species?
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to everybody, and nice meeting you. And well, this is a great opportunity that we are bringing this issue at the table. Of course, hurricane and floods have a direct and severe impact for wildlife rescue. In Guatemala, especially because of the geography that we have and the biodiversity that Guatemala has. However, in Guatemala, one of the biggest threats are the forest fires and the volcano eruptions. We have 24 volcanoes, and they have been the main impact on endangered species rescue and rehabilitations. They cause habitat destruction, injuries and mortality, nest and juvenile loss. We also have to remember that we have the change of the use of the soil. You know, now that we have a lot of African palms farms, which now, like my two predecessors were saying, you know, they're changing the habitat for the animals. In regards to the wildfires that affects Guatemala every summer, I mean, we lose a lot of forest. The impacts are death and injuries, burns, smoke inhalation, and suffocation. Slow-moving species like the turtles, the armadillos, the anteaters, as snakes are often unable to escape the flames. And the nesting and eggs in the three hollows on the ground are destroyed. before they can they can feed. So in short, the forest fires directly kill and injure wildlife, wipe out critical habitats, and force survivors into conflict with humans. For endangered species, this can mean the loss of an entire generation. In Guatemala, every year we expect the fires. There is a lot of written legislation, but it's written. In reality, we are not prepared. The government authorities are not prepared. There is not enough budgets for the governmental authorities that are in charge, because at the end, this is a problem of the government. And we, the NGOs, we of course share our expertise, we have the rescue center to receive the animals, but there is not really a way that we are prepared, especially for we just had a big eruption here of the fire volcano, and we were there, but we were waiting for the firefighters to bring the animals. We couldn't get into the volcano. So we need more training, not only the people at the rescue center, but the training of the authorities. We are not prepared, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you for that context, Miriam ma'am, because I think it's very important that you brought out that it's at least there in your plans and laws and policies to protect the wildlife. I think in many countries, even that is missing. The disasters are not new, as you all mentioned, but I think we are not yet prepared to handle it, especially the rescue and resilience work that plans that are being now prepared in almost all countries. One of the most important pressure that disasters put in is both on local communities and wildlife, because I think we are not even prepared for our community rescue and rehabilitation, and wildlife is not even thought about in many countries. But how do you see, let me take each one of you again, go back to you, Anish, first. How do you see the balance between meeting community needs and ensuring long-term wildlife conservation during such crisis?
Without doubt, whenever there's a natural disaster, the entire government machinery gets active, and it's for rescuing people. And obviously people who are directly impacted, and many of these who live around the habitats that we three are working for, they are also very highly marginalized. So the focus and all the money obviously goes in rescue and rehabilitation of people.
Right.
Animals are generally, obviously the forest department tries to do whatever it can. However, I just give you a couple of examples. In Sundarbans, which is a world famous habitat for tigers in both India and Bangladesh. Whenever there is a cyclone or very high winds, a lot of villages get inundated. And the forest department is requested, because the forest department has access and they know where these villages are. The government machinery actually takes help of the forest department to go and go with first response as first responders for people with water, with blankets, with a lot of other things. So even the forest department, which is supposed to be taking care of wildlife, is that at that point activated to help people. And this is obviously going to remain, and that's where the role of non-governmental organizations come in. And I think the unfortunate part is that the government has the capacity to deal with large landscapes with the best intention. Some of the most effective non-governmental organizations cannot work at scale.
Right.
So what happens is that they do whatever they can. And I know of incidences where, especially in Kaziranga, where there is flooding every year, but nowadays it's far more severe. You have big animals like elephants, rhinos, wild buffaloes that get into trouble. and it's almost impossible for a small organization to create a facility for that kind of a place.
Right.
So I think NGOs have to be strengthened.
Yes.
And this partnership between the government and NGO has to be stronger, and the government should actually create at least facilities which can be manned by professionals from NGOs. So
Right.
government, and these are recurring issues. So cyclones in Sundarbans will happen every 2, 3, 4 years.
Right.
Flooding happens every time in certain flood-prone areas. In case of Guatemala, as she said, fire is a given. And so while all this is known, it is important for the government to create the machinery and the infrastructure for it, because that requires big money and that can come from the government. And the soft skills can always be provided by NGOs. So I think in the case of natural disasters, there is never going to be balance. It is always going to be all about human beings. But by creating the facilities,
Yes.
I think NGOs will be far more effective than they are currently. So I think that's the way we have to look at it. As Dr. Marker mentioned, after every natural disaster, there is more interaction between wildlife and potentially dangerous animals and people. And when it comes to herbivores, and obviously in these situations where a lot of villages are cut off from the big cities, people have to rely on wild protein for survival. And in certain countries where bushmeat is eaten, it's a different matter. But in India, most people are vegetarians, and the wildlife laws are so strict that you cannot actually go and hunt wild animals openly. But in these kind of situations, obviously, when they go on high ground, if it's flooding, then mostly the high grounds are where villages are, and they become very easy targets for people. And in that kind of a situation, obviously, you cannot really, find these people, because it's about life and death. So a lot of species and animals that survive the disaster are actually then taken away by people. So the impact of natural disaster with smaller and smaller protected areas and wildlife habitat is now manifold. It's not just the life lost because of the disaster, but post the disaster, there is huge amount of hunting that happens because there is need for food for the people who get stuck there.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important points, Dr. Anish. And I think that brings us to Miss Miriam, who's actually running these rescue centers. Ma'am, can you tell us what is the role of wildlife rescue centers in this disaster preparedness and response? Because as Anish mentioned, our criteria and our focus is always on protecting human life. But I think organizations like ARCAS and others who are focused on rescue centers, their role becomes important. You can give us some examples and share about how the role that your centers have played. You're muted. Ma'am, you're muted.
Thank you very much. In regard to the question, our role as the rescue center first is we need to be ready. We need to make sure that when a disaster happens, the rescue center facilities are with electricity, no flood, and be ready to receive the animals. And we have to remember that there is an access blocked of the roads. So that makes it very difficult for us the transportation of injured animals or send food or medicines. A lot of the time, there is a bridge that falls, and so it makes it very difficult. This resource restraint sudden increases in animal admissions overwhelm and limited veterinary staff, food supplies, and rehabilitation space. Now, in Guatemala, we are really, even though there are a small rescue center, our ARCAS is the leader in rescue centers in Guatemala. So it is important to mention that neither the government and not the rescue centers has the equipment, especially the vehicles, to properly respond to an emergency.
Yes.
According to the law and the law of national disasters, there should be like an ambulance. There has never been an ambulance. We all have to use our own trucks, our own gasoline, and like Dr. Anish said, that the government should give support to the NGOs to, and that's not a reality. ARCAS has been, leads from donations, from the zoos in the States, from people that cares about animals. But in Guatemala, which is a country that there is so much many problems, like very poor people, old people, children's in the street, animals are not an issue. You know, they always say, oh, Miriam and her animals. And so like in the States, you know, you have a dog, you sleep with your dog. Here, a dog is a dog. So if I tell you about the animals, you know, so for us, it's very difficult to do the fundraising because the government gives very, very limited, not because they don't want to, it's because they don't have the Congress or the Senate in Guatemala doesn't give the necessary funds for the authorities to do it. So we do what we can. We are ready with what we can, and our role is to be ready, you know, and wait for whatever comes. We've been looking funds to have our own ambulance to be able, because what we do is we wait for them to bring them.
Yes.
We should be there in the, like if a volcano is erupting, we should be there, you know, and we are there, but with the limited resources. So this is the reality of the rescue centers in Guatemala. Thank God we exist because we have received a lot of burnt animals. Yes, it's very sad, but we have succeeded in many opportunities in giving attend these injured animals that come to the center.
So I think the work that you're doing is so important, and obviously not much support, both in terms of resources and money and appreciation is given. But we do realize the importance of what you are doing, Ms. Miriam. But I also want to highlight that the role of this motion therefore becomes very important, is not only in actually putting on place, on record, on making mandatory for all members, IUCN members, which are, as you know, are both government and NGOs, and different state members, to actually not only put in place this requirement for wildlife to be taken care in disasters, but also put in place policies, programs, and resources and training, as Dr. Anish mentioned, to be prepared for such disasters. Dr. Marker, actually, I wanted to come to you to talk about a little bit of the adaptive management strategies that you may have seen to help the habitat restoration and community-based livestock protection that we have seen. At least that has been taken care of to some extent, not many extent in many countries. But how has such management strategies helped, and what more can be done to kind of make sure that wildlife is protected during disasters?
Well, I think a lot of what has been said is really important. I think one of the things that we don't think about is that we kind of go through these disasters regularly, and we're not pre-planning for them, even on a government or a global scale.
Right.
And I would like to actually put that forward, is that we have predictive models that we could actually be utilizing. And in much of what we know, we should be putting into place. I mean, as I said, I live in some of the most arid landscapes there are in the world, and we know that we don't get rain. And so we have tried to work with our communities for years to say, plan for drought. And with that, that means reducing our grazing, our impact on the land, and then starting to look at other livelihood aspects. And I think those are big things to think about on global wildlife management issues. We are a continent, a globe of human beings, and the wildlife does need our assistance, but we can also utilize the knowledge in science and pre-think about some of this. In many respects, I mean, we've got a fire going on right now. We're in fire season. We're in the middle of, we're in a very dry area. And with this, we do know the aspects of what's happening with the wildlife. In many places, there are no rescue centers and there is no place. These are natural. And so unfortunately, we lose a lot of our world's biodiversity because of this. And we're exasperating it more through the usage of our fossil fuels and the way that we are promoting climate change on a global scale. But I work very closely with communities, and what we've tried to do through development of conservancies has tried to help the communities put the natural resources into their hands and then work closely with them in that adaptive management. So looking ahead, being aware that we're not going to have big rains, then we've got to reduce the impact on the land. That then is also going to affect the livelihoods, but then trying to look at how can communities make more money having other aspects. Maybe they can have less goats and sheep and cows, but maybe they could do things like make cheese, and you don't even need refrigeration to do that, and you've got something more to eat, which is then you only need one cow versus a lot to have actually some of that protein. There are different adaptive aspects. We're also seeing a lot of problems in the habitats of these arid lands from overgrazing, and we not only just get sand deserts, we end up with thickened thorn bushes, which is taking over much more of our habitat. And we're now looking at adaptive programs of harvesting that, making animal feed, making electricity. So using these kinds of natural products to help communities in the programs. But I think pre-thinking and pre-planning is something that as a global network, we're not doing well. We look at our little area, I look at a whole broad sweep of where like the cheetah lives. And when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the problems within those areas, who the people are, and what kind of resources and potential there could be. And then help the communities to look at the aspect that live without rain. And when you do get that one drop of rain, we need to collect it and use it. And that means maybe making natural dams and protecting our livestock. We've got a lot of tools that we can take care of our livestock much better so that it is not vulnerable to human-wildlife conflict, in particular when we have these very dry cycles that go on that do affect the livestock. But we do have a lot more tools that I don't believe that we're utilizing. I think we feel really sorry for ourselves when these natural disasters occur, but I think that we could be pre-thinking and pre-planning. And again, I think we need a little bit more global input into all of this to realize that we are a global world.
I completely agree with you, Dr. Marker. Very, very important points that you have flagged, a couple of them, and especially one of the most important ones is how well we need to pre-plan and be pre-prepared for emergencies that are occurring now more and more in vulnerable countries like all of ours because of climate change. I think the other important point that you really made was about how we can talk about how we can make this into a livelihood opportunity for our communities to be able to protect the wildlife. And I think one of the things that we didn't talk enough about is the biodiversity monitoring systems to track disaster impacts. I think that can also be an opportunity or a mechanism for engaging communities. I don't know, does any of you know about any of these monitoring systems that exist to track disaster impacts? Any of you? Yes, Dr. Anish.
So in case of the river systems, and we work on gharial, the long-snouted crocodile, which is highly endangered, and also the Ganges River dolphin. So that's in the river systems. So what we are using citizen science, because many of the best gharial habitats are in some of those relatively undisturbed or less disturbed rivers, the Chambal in the central Indian landscape. And they are vulnerable because they nest on banks or bars, mostly on banks. And when you have flooding and non-seasonal flooding, and if it coincides with their breeding, their nest just gets washed away. But a very big threat. And that happens in the past, it used to happen, but most of our rivers are dammed at multiple areas. River Chambal itself has 5 big dams on it. And so you can imagine the impact of that along with the flooding season. So the flood first impacts the dam, and then the dam walls are gates are opened, and the flow rate goes up so much more. If normal flooding will have a flow rate, but when a dam gate is opened, it causes so much more problems for these sensitive species. So what we are doing is, and remember, India also is 1.5 billion people, and they need housing. And while we have almost 7,500 kilometers of coastline, a lot of sand is taken out of our rivers for building. And so it's very important that while these natural disasters happen, they are cyclical, but the sand that is being taken, and most of it is done without any regulation. It's an unregulated industry, really. We are using the help of citizen science to understand the impact of what is happening on the sand side, so that we can predict which are the most vulnerable nesting sites for the ghadial, so that we can go and collect the eggs of those ghadial which we know are going to suffer, because when the flow rate goes up, those banks are going to go up because they have become vulnerable due to excess removal of sand for housing. So that we are doing. We are also using remote sense data to actually keep looking at how the rivers, as we all know, they are not static. They appear static, but they move a lot. And so all that is being done. So yeah, science and monitoring of wildlife can be used to reduce the impact. You cannot eliminate it, but you can at least reduce it.
Yes, I think very important, as Dr. Marker said, for pre-planning and preparedness. I think the new technologies and citizen science and tools like biodiversity monitoring systems help at least tracking and preparing ourselves for future such disasters. Dr. Marker, Miriam, ma'am, if you have any more examples that you can share, it'll be useful to know how different countries are adapting or using these technologies for preparing and planning for such disasters to protect wildlife. Dr. Marker?
Well, I think we spend a lot of time, within our communities we've got conservancies throughout the country. And about 20% of our land is under conservancy management, which is really under the community management, where the other 20% really is under government. And the communities then, in working together with the government too, we do look a lot at the climate and the adaptability and what's going on, and trying to put that into the pre-planning. I believe that the communities are great citizen scientists. Absolutely. And can be even greater utilized in these aspects. So I think from what we've done in Namibia, and Kenya has done quite a bit, and we've seen this in many of the other, now growing in some of the other African countries, the community-based programs, which I think are so important.
Yes.
We are fortunate in Namibia. We have a very small human population, although with that, in an arid landscape, you can't do much with a lot of people anyway, because we don't have enough water. And so I believe that those are the things that could be even utilized more in schools and education.
Yes.
Is if we start bringing education more into how we're actually being humans on the earth.
Yes.
And being a part of the system, instead of we're studying it or even thinking that our jobs aren't a part of conservation. I think conservation science is something that should spread through every discipline there is in education, and help us learn how we can be citizens of the earth and work together to make an earth for us. Because I think we are, we're talking about disasters, but I think we are in the #1 world disaster period, that is causing all these other disasters. And we really aren't recognizing that to the extent that we could and should. And I think that we all tiptoe because, nobody wants to talk doom and gloom, but what we want to do is we want to talk about reality and then face reality, how we're going to address our continents, our people, on how we're actually going to address these situations. Yes, we are conservationists and we love wildlife, but we also are people and we love our people.
Absolutely.
And together we're a problem, but we're also the solution. And I think we need to find more solution-based programs that get the general public involved. And that's why I'm so involved and a part of the Conservancy initiative that we've developed here in Namibia, and we've now developed it up in Somaliland and in Kenya, that the communities become really more engaged. They need to be educated, but they also need to get out of poverty, and we shouldn't have poverty in these days and age, which are causing so many of the ongoing problems that we have. So although we have wealth that is causing a lot of the problems we're in right now, the aspects of poverty are not able to get out of those cycles. And so we've got to somehow link, prosperity and poverty into a way of making us global citizens so that we're making the world a better place.
I could not agree with you. You said it so beautifully. I don't want to repeat that, but this distinction and this conflict or this argument has been going on for quite some time about protecting humans versus protecting wildlife. But I think you've said it well, because we are together a unit, and if we cannot protect one part of it, the other part also suffers, right? So I think it's something and we need to look at solutions, and that's why I was talking about how technology, citizen science, how Dr. Anish gave some examples about how citizen science and technology, we can involve public. We can involve not only governments who are in the preparedness, but also general public, and bringing in livelihood, citizen science are important issues, ways which we NGOs can also contribute. I love the idea of the conservancies, and perhaps you can talk a little bit more about what the conservancies do, because I don't think this idea exists other than in Africa. For example, in India, do we have that in Asia, Dr. Andheria, the idea of conservancies? Because I have never heard of that before.
No, it's there was a discussion on it, very serious one. It went all the way to the central government, but it got rejected from there because. But in Maharashtra, the state that I come from, there is a government resolution that was passed. It's called a GR, where they are basically encouraging people who have large lands to open their boundaries to allow animals in lieu of that, they will get certain facilities. They can run some tourism activities, but it is still in the nascent stage. And probably, see, again, it also depends on the density of human beings. Conservancy as a idea works where it's a low human density area. In India, if you look at a 10,000 hectare forest land, you will have some 50 villages there. So if you want to run a conservancy project, the money has to be earned through something, right? So if such a large land or whatever you do tourism, hunting is not allowed. So basically you cannot hunt animals and earn money, right? So it's only tourism. So from tourism, how much money can you earn so that it can be equally distributed amongst people? So that is what keeps it away. However, having said that, in India too, there are landscapes, especially the very dry habitats in the Kutch area, which is low density, the Ladakh area, which is trans-Himalayan areas, and the northeastern states like Arunachal, Manipur, Nagaland, where obviously there is huge amount of land with communities. Nearly 95% of the land there belongs to the communities. And there they have large land holdings, and probably the conservancy model can be tried out in these three areas for sure, if not in other areas where human densities are very high. But yeah, it's a good idea, and whatever works today to bring back or to rewild our habitats and to sustain wildlife. But wildlife cannot be sustained without a good economic model.
Absolutely.
If communities are happy, wildlife will survive. It is pure mathematics. It is not, you can't save a cheetah or a tiger because it is charismatic. As long as a living tiger, it will help the communities by raising money for them, or the cash flow has to happen. If a living tiger can provide more income than a dead tiger, tigers will survive. It's as simple as that.
You're very well said, Dr. Anish. I think that is the key. It is about protecting lives of humans, and by only protecting the wildlife, which is part of us. Dr. Miriam, now we've talked a little bit about technology. We've talked about talked about communities and their role in protecting wildlife, especially in disasters. Let me come a little bit about legal framework supporting wildlife recovery after disasters, or maybe during disasters. Again, I want to talk a little bit more about how different governments are adopting this kind of. You rightly said that there is some policies that exist, for example, in your country. But what about others? Is that sufficient? First of all, the policy, and second, what can we do to strengthen the implementation if these exist?
Well, several things. Guatemala has now a government that is really amicable with environment issues.
Good.
So we have a very good Ministry of the Environment. She is very well knowledgeable, and she's really trying hard to strengthen the law. We do have laws. We have beautiful laws in here.
Okay.
And right now I am invited in a few days to participate of the Ministry of Agriculture, because they were going to talk about the strategy and politics about the forest fires. So I'm going to make sure that they're going to have a big chapter about the wildlife. But in ARCAS, because the problem here is we have a new government every 4 years. So they forget about what was approved in the other government, and everybody comes with their own ideas, new ideas. So there is not a history of working a long time, So that's happened on our side. So in ARCAS, we have learned that the local communities are the first responders, are on the front line before any help arrives. So we have learned that we have to build and trust on partnerships. Because they are the ones that the communities are the ones that are going to help protect wildlife. So which means a lot of education in this respect.
True.
Share vulnerability creates share responsibility. So the interdependence encourages local people to see wildlife protection as a part of protection their own future. So again, education is the key, but this ARCAS has to do with the communities. We cannot rely that the government is going to do it. This has to be a job made by ARCAS.
True.
In ARCAS, we have to improvise, we have to create, and we have to take advantage of the local knowledge of the people, the communities that are in the field. Because wildlife is the last thing that first is the life of humans, then is wildlife, maybe, So we will have to do a balancing between human needs and wildlife rescue into a humanitarian response. We also talk about the capacity building must be shared with the communities.
Yes.
Partnerships are essential, and conservation as a risk reduction. That is something very important that we have to work with the communities about healthy ecosystem, like we said before, because forests, wetlands, mangroves, they protect both people and wildlife from the worst impacts of disasters. So long-time investment in conservation is a form of disaster prevention, and climate resilience is not a luxury.
Yes.
So we are really convinced that here in Guatemala, this is something that ARCAS has to do, whatever the authorities do or the governmental authorities. I think that this is one of our main goals, just to work in hand with the communities, because as I say, they are the first responders, they are there. And it has to be like, we got to go through community, especially the Mayan Biosphere Reserve, which contains the largest forest.
Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting that point. I think it's so critical. And Dr. Marker also mentioned about global cooperation. Besides, of course, the partnership with the community is the key, but to strengthen that, to enrich that, to be prepared for that disaster that we know communities will be first responders. We need to have more global cooperation especially for wide-ranging species like the big cats, but also for actually maintaining the ecosystem that Dr. Anish also explained very beautifully. Dr. Marker, do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of global cooperation that would be required, or maybe legal frameworks that are required to kind of help the wildlife during disasters?
Well, because I don't think that there's much really talked about in natural disasters.
Yes.
I do think it is mostly the NGOs that come. And the wildlife departments, I think on a global scale, are oftentimes the weaker of most of the wildlife departments everywhere, because wildlife departments don't really bring in a lot of economics into a country like agriculture might or something. So that has been one of my findings. One of the things that I've worked on for years has been a international awareness, where we've worked closely with our governments in having them through working actually directly with them and educating them about the importance and value of the wildlife within their countries.
Right.
And so I do believe that every state and every government should have, and NGOs can work together, and maybe it could be something that, is IUCN groups or NGOs working together, where we work together on educating the governments so that they know why we care about the wildlife, and the natural resources and the benefits of those into the other sectors as well. Because just working with your wildlife department is great, but we really need all of the other ministries engaged.
Yes.
And so there's a global organization that has tried to work in many different countries called the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, where they've gone in and actually helped develop these groups within parliaments. And so that it's the NGOs that come in and then do the education on what's needed. And on a global scale, I could, come to, it's sharing those responsibilities on a global way. So even though, I live in Namibia, but I speak American and an American, when I go to America, I talk to the parliament there or the Congress, and I explain to them about the issues that we're faced on a global scale.
Right.
And when I talk here in Namibia or in Somaliland or in Kenya or in Ethiopia, I also talk about the global issues as well as the ones that are regional or affecting their country. Because if we don't put it into perspective, we think about ourselves, but we are a global world. And these issues that are happening in all the other countries are also affecting everybody else.
Absolutely, well said. I think the political and the policy advocacy that we need to do on behalf of wildlife, I think is becoming more important as we speak, especially global cooperation and partnerships that are required. So I want to end with Dr. Anish and to talk about some practical steps. We've talked about legal steps, but what about practical steps that countries like India, which are vulnerable to climate disasters, but also very, very biodiverse rich, how can we prioritize to strengthen disaster preparedness and response for wildlife and local communities in the coming years? Dr. Anish?
There are many, many things, and a lot of it are required. Some of those are practical that the government feels. See, when I say practical, practical from a conservationist point of view is different from how the policymakers view it. Because wildlife, unfortunately, doesn't vote.
Yes.
So while they are probably more in number than humans, but their votes doesn't count. That's the main reason why what seems so practical is not implemented. And this is not about India. It is about the planet. And whether you're talking about developed nations or underdeveloped nations, it's the same everywhere. So I think I'm talking from the Indian context. There are many things. First is to not allow our protected areas to get fragmented further. And this is happening because of linear infrastructure growth. India is growing very rapidly. And so we have to have the wildlife policies have to remain strong. There has to be a conversation between different line departments at the inception of all the projects, not when they come from approval. Mostly what happens is they come to the forest department when the road is already at the doors of the park, and they ask them that we have already built a 6-lane road and it's now going to cut through the forest. We have spent so many thousands of crores. If you don't allow us to pass, it is such a big loss. So I think policy at that level where it has to be a more integrated approach when different line departments plan things together, and the environment, which is the MOEFCC, has to be a very important participant in those conversations. The protected area network of India needs to be expanded through community and conservation reserves. I'm not talking about national parks and sanctuaries. Wherever they are possible, it's fine. But I think we have already declared whatever had to be declared. But there is huge amount of land with communities. And I think the government needs to understand the importance of involving communities in coming up. Some states are far more forward thinking. And although we don't have conservancies, but there are so many community reserves that have come up in the last half a decade, which is very good, where the people become the custodians of their environment, which means they put the policy in place and the government will help them with some funds and some training, etc., etc. So that is very important. We need to strengthen the corridors, the forests or certain animal use habitats, which are there between our small size protected areas. India's protected areas are small, so we need corridors to be there. We need to make sure that dams are not built, large dams on seismically sensitive areas up, and that is entire Himalayan range. We have big, large dams coming in so many of these mountains. And although natural disasters like flooding, landslides can cause damage to those dams, and the impact of a natural disaster can go up many magnitudes because the dams and roads are being built in areas where they should not be built in. The Himalayas, as we all know, is very crumbly. And it is very sensitive. And so that the government at that level, one has to be very clear. Otherwise, every 10, 15 years, you will have some huge disaster and you will lose a lot of human life. And you cannot even measure what it will do to the environment. Then dams that are built on rivers, they need to be built in such a way that reverse migration of species is possible. Downward migration happens, but there are so many species and they are very important for economy. So people think that rivers that empty into the sea, it's actually wasting fresh water in the sea. And so people talk of diverting and they talk of linking rivers. But it is important for rivers to empty into the sea, that fresh water meeting the brackish water or the sea water is very important. It's the most nutritious soup, where most of your marine fish species, which are very important for business, they breed in that area. Those are the nurseries. So they need to make sure that, because disasters will happen, but we need to work on these kind of things which don't directly look like a disaster management, but they have a big role to play in sustaining economy. And as I said, poor people, even if they want to, they cannot conserve wildlife. They have to depend on fish. They will overfish. They will remove younger fish, and that will impact their own society. And there will be even outward migration of people from villages into the city, and the life in the city, as you know, is not good at all for people who come in. So we have to solve these kind of issues at that level. Finally, I think we need to strengthen the rescue canvas.
Yes.
And as I said, and I will repeat, that the government has to work with non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and other scientific organizations. They will have to provide, they have to keep, and in India, I think human-wildlife conflict is actually, we are trying to see if it can be interpreted or it can be defined as another natural disaster, because it is also a disaster which is created by humans, and the impact of that on communities. So if it comes under the Natural Disaster Act, suddenly you will have more money to create these kind of facilities so that in these kind of situations, animals can be rescued, they can be used as a transit facility and then released back. So that the government has to provide the infrastructure, and the soft skills will come from the veterinary doctors and the rescue organizations there. And as my co-panelists have mentioned, the primary response teams are the villagers. They also know wildlife better than a lot of scientists because they live with them. And so we need to spread awareness. They have to be the frontliners, and they should get the due credit for playing the role. Normally, what happens is, so a lot of awards have to be given out to people who have really, put their lives on the line to protect wildlife. And I think that's very important. Finally, I think on the policy front and globally, and IUCN, because we are all play active role in the IUCN, the international policy cannot solve a problem of a country, but we need policy on the beef. So all of our rainforests in South America, in Central America, are being cut down to grow fodder to feed the beef industry in Europe. So you can imagine that the rainforest of Amazon or Guatemala, or wherever you talk of any of those countries, they are naturally protecting the planet from natural disasters. And when you remove that line of defense, which has been there for millions of years, and converting it into the most petty crop like soya, or it could be maize, it is going to only increase the impact of natural disaster. The soil that will be taken up by wind, the soil that will get washed away by floods, are all going to end up in the sea or on our mountains, which has ice and snow. And the rate at which the snow and ice melts goes up because of the soil that gets deposited on the white. When white becomes brown and black, it absorbs more heat, and that melts most of our glaciers, and that has huge impact on communities, and also increases the impact of floods, etc., etc. So I think it will have to be both at the national level, one needs to work, and the global level should look at, we should not be symptomatic. All of our work is just action reaction. So while we need to do the mission critical things of saving lives every year, but there has to be long-term planning so that future natural disasters and the impact of that can be lessened. So that's where we have to work. And I think IUCN will have a big role to play. There are many things, but I think for paucity of time, I think this is what I feel are the most important things.
Absolutely, Dr. Anish. You've actually summarized it very beautifully, what Dr. Marker and Dr. Miss Miriam was also saying. I think the concerns are all there, and you've explained it through your experiences and your work that you have been doing. Clearly, this particular motion is an important motion and will be accepted at WCC. And we all will consider not only integrating wildlife in our respective disaster resilience and relief plans, but also take forward the suggestions and experiences that you all talked about. I would like to thank each one of you for coming on today and to talk about your experiences and your efforts that you're doing in your respective countries and in work to help perhaps further enhance, develop guidelines for reducing impacts and disaster on wildlife, review existing disaster management legislation and plans, and then also adopt communication and awareness raising plans, as Ms. Miriam and Dr. Anish and Dr. Marker has mentioned. Communication and awareness plans are very important on wildlife in the event of natural disaster, not just in natural disaster, but in general, of course, but also in natural disasters, they play a very important role. So perhaps we need to focus on that. So I'd like to thank you all for joining in today. I'd like to wind up for today and look forward meeting you at WCC. I also like to thank my colleague from CMS VATAVARAN, Kencho Dorji and Sabyasachi for putting together this webinar. I hope with our conversation, more people will be in favor of the work that we all do and support wildlife, especially during disasters. So thank you all for joining in, and namaste.
Namaste. Pleasure is mine.
Thank you. Thank you.